Like we start with the money scripts, right? And try to understand, what did we hear about money growing up? What stuck with us? What are we still walking around with? What messages? And it gives us so much understanding. But then what you just moved into now is like the dreams. You've got to be able to talk about what your dreams are without judgment. And that's the tough part. Like I've been working, it just happened with a client. Um, the dream conversation didn't go so well. So I said, "Well, what did it sound like?" Like what did you share? How did you respond? And I'm like, "Oh yeah, probably if I had shared that, but I got that response." And I was kind of careful about it, but I said, "Can I be really honest with you here? I would have felt dismissed and kind of sad too. So why don't you do that dream conversation again?" And here's how it can be. And it has to be without judgment. It has to just be with curiosity instead of going into, and this is speaking, Sean, to your shared goals. You've got to talk about your dreams to be able to come up and be aligned with shared goals. But the way to get there can be difficult for people, the path to get to those shared goals, because if you're talking about those, you might jump in with evaluation. "Oh, well, we can't do that. No, that's not practical, but we could do this over here." That's not what the conversation is about. It's about just talking about and being curious about your partner and saying, "And what else? And where would you like to have that happen? And why is that important to you?" And that's it. That's it.
Welcome, everybody, back to the Growing Money with Sean Trace podcast. I am your host today, and I have an awesome return guest with me today. Can you tell people who you are and a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And thank you, Sean, for having me back on again. It's been a while, and so I'm looking forward to it. Yeah, I'm a financial relationship and wealth building coach. And so I'm a financial coach, but my focus is on working with couples and helping them learn to talk about money in more healthy ways and build their partnership, because that absolutely stands in the way of financial peace, and it stands in the way of being able to build their wealth and grow their future, um, because, they get into patterns of avoiding conversations, and it's stressful, and they can't make decisions, and then it can impact their marriage. And so, yeah, over the time of coaching, I have just realized that I really, really love working with couples and diving in and helping those that are really having trouble with that.
I love that. One of the things I think that when you talk about relationships and couples specifically, um, we have these ideas that people get married and then they're on the same page. But one of the things that I realized very quickly when I got married is that very rarely are my wife and I automatically on the same page.
Yeah.
We can get there.
Yeah.
We can get there.
Good.
But it takes time. And it takes time because, you have to sit there, and the way we were raised thinking and talking about money is very different, and I think that that's something that is, you can't underestimate. Like you had asked me before the podcast, you're just like, "Sean, you got to speak to all these really interesting people on here."
Yes,
And,
exactly.
and I have, but one of the cool things is like, I noticed that it doesn't matter if a person is a CFP, a CPA, or CC, whatever, or they're just this or that. They're all saying the same thing. Everyone's talking about these underlying money principles.
Mm.
And one of the big things is like, and
Mhm.
I love, some of my favorite people have been, I had this one doctor of money psychology come on, and he was talking about our money scripts. Like all of us have these different things that we were taught since we were a kid. And the way that your relationship with money shows up, you don't think about. And but when you get into a relationship, let's make it
Yep.
more simple.
Okay.
Dog people. Are you a dog person? Okay.
Yeah.
Or
Or
cat
a cat
person,
person.
right?
Yeah.
Dog person, cat person, or not a pet person. Now, it doesn't really matter. Any of those 3 are fun. You can be no pets, you can be a dog person, you can be a cat person. But when you get into a marriage and you're different from your spouse, you're a dog person, they're a cat person, or they're a dog person and you don't like animals. Suddenly, something that seemed very small becomes really, really big because it is a very underlying difference. And like our relationship with money is just as intricate as whether you're a dog or cat person.
Yeah, I love the, yeah, the example, the very simple example, but I will add that then with money, it's much more critical
100%.
about whether we're deciding about whether a dog or a cat. So, it's the same underlying, are you a dog or cat person? Are you a, um, I have a couple of terms, expressive spender or a protective saver. Generally people fall
Mm,
into 2 of those categories, and then when they're under stress, then there's other types of kind of like money types or personalities that show up within those. Um,
mhm,
but, so that's kinda like the dog and the cat, but it there's so much more at stake when we're talking
yeah.
about money, and it can impact the relationship so much more.
It can build you up or it can tear you down. And I think that this is something that's really interesting that people don't realize is that those early those early things that you grow up with and they still show up, but you are not always aware to them. Just like if you have subconscious fears, you know? But I want to ask about your experience because specifically, I want to learn from what you went through. Like when you and your partner first started talking about money, what part of it felt easy and what part of it felt uncomfortable?
Yeah, I have to admit that my husband and I have gotten along pretty well with money, but we still have some rocky spots. And when we first got together, he had some credit card debt, I did not, so we had to talk through that. And we had to take care of that. But I would say that he's a protective saver. I would say he just leans towards saving. And because I will go back and forth, I'm kind of like under stress, I might spend. So I sort of rock back and forth between spender and saver. And I think that more in the beginning, and I don't do this anymore, but I would find myself, hiding. Yeah. If I would spend, I would find myself not really I'd walk in the house with the bags of clothes and just kinda, like, try to get them to the closet before they'd be seen. So, yeah, you're in a partnership and you're working on money together, and, you don't wanna have any secrets. You wanna have transparency, but that can be hard. Uh-huh, you're afraid of being, I think the fear there is that, you will be criticized,
Mhm.
and you already maybe feel a little guilty, and you sure don't want that to be brought out into the open. Um, what I have seen mostly with my clients, lots of lots of struggle, coming together in a marriage. Do we share our finances? Do we, or do we keep our separate accounts? Um, this means so much to me to spend time on going out with family and blowing $800 at a restaurant with extended family. And this is why, because I'm making connection and relationships are important to me. That's a money script, right? And then
Mhm.
maybe the spouse is like, yeah, no, I mean, family's important, but no, I'm not gonna spend money that way. And,
Yep.
that's gonna put us in peril. So, yeah, conflicts like that, definitely there are, money scripts underneath that, and there are reasons why we feel that way because of what it could be. I always say it's both nature and nurture. There might be like a natural personality tendency towards something, but then there's also the nurture. What did you hear? What kind of messages did you hear growing up? And we always start in our conversations talking about those money scripts. Sean,
Yeah.
always digging those up because like you said, you've talked to so many people, so many financial experts, and that's just sort of like an underlying theme.
They all talk about it. Like,
Yeah,
you have these underlying things that are there, and you just don't always realize it until you start uncovering the stuff that's been
yeah.
covering everything, and it's
Mhm.
like one of the things too is like when people this is something like that is culturally different too. Like mine, yours, ours, I have, I love my father-in-law, but he kind of views all of the motorbikes in our house as collective, and I'm, like, very much like, when I have my own vehicle, that's my vehicle, and so it's ours, 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 and that's a collective culture type of a thing, and when I used to talk to my wife about that early in our marriage, I was like, it would be tough for me because her culture is a much more communal culture. Everything's
Yeah.
shared.
Mhm.
And I was like, but that's really challenging when there are family members that are not being
Yeah.
conscious of their spending,
Yeah.
And so
Mhm.
it caused stress.
Mhm.
And we had to get to the place of finding out how we could stand together. And didn't mean we always agreed. But one of the things that I think that was most important for my marriage and our approach to finance, and we don't have it all together. We are working on fixing it and getting it in the right direction, but was having a common goal because
Absolutely.
we could figure out the little things if we had a goal that we were tracking towards. It's like I both of us say we want to make it to that destination. We want to travel to San Francisco from where we're at right now. Well, we could go east through Japan, and then we'd take a flight over to San Francisco, or we could go through Taiwan. Now, these are different ways of doing it,
Yeah.
and neither of them is right or wrong. They have different advantages and different disadvantages. But the reality is, if we have that common goal, getting there becomes a lot easier, and it allows us the freedom to explore that path without some of the stress, if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
So, are you just getting really smart from all of these conversations that you've been having with financial experts?
I don't know.
I
No,
don't
because
know
I
because
still mess things up. I bought
well,
something stupid today, and I didn't need to do it, and I did it.
because, you're just bringing up all of these things that we absolutely do in the work, like, we start with the money scripts, right? And try to understand what did we hear about money growing up? What stuck with us? What are we still walking around with? What messages? And it gives us so much understanding. But then what you just moved into now is like the dreams. You've got to be able to talk about what your dreams are without judgment. And that's the tough
Mhm.
part. Like I've been working, it just happened with a client. Um, the dream conversation didn't go so well. So I said, "Well, what did it sound like?" Like what did you share? How did you respond? And I'm like, "Oh, yeah, probably if I had shared that, but I got that response." And I was kind of careful about it, but I said, "Can
Mhm.
I be really honest with you here?" I would have felt dismissed and kind of sad too. So why don't you do that dream conversation again? And
Mm.
here's how it can be. And it has to be without judgment. It has to just be with curiosity instead of going into, and this is speaking, Sean, to your shared goals. You've got to talk about your
Yeah.
dreams to be able to come up and be aligned with shared goals. But the way to get there can be difficult for people, the path to get to those shared goals, because if you're talking about those, you might jump in with evaluation. Oh, well, we can't do that. No, that's not practical, but we could do this over here. That's not what the conversation is about. It's about just talking about and being curious about your partner and saying, and what else? And where would you like to have that happen? And why is that important to you? And that's it. That's it. You're not like trying to fix it and make it happen or anything like that. But you have to get to that point because we kind of have our perspectives, our fixed perspectives, and we have
Yeah.
to step out of those and really be. I mean, this applies to everything in our relationships, but money, it's really important to be
Right?
that way with it.
It's interesting because people forget that, what I was like the other day, I had this epiphany moment because I was talking to a guest about but it wasn't about money, it was on my Sean Trace Show podcast, and we were talking just about goals in life and accomplishing things, and as we were talking about this, one of the things that popped up was that if you want to accomplish something, you have to have 3 things. You have to figure out your goals, but once you figure out the goals, you have to have your values. And the values are really important because your values represent what's important to you and like how are you going to get there and like the why,
Yeah.
And then upon the values, after you have the values, the one and single most important thing is the habits. And unless you have the habits, you're not getting anywhere. And that's where I find myself getting hung up
Mhm.
because I have the goals
Mm.
and I have the values, the reasons I wanna get there, but then I get hung up on all the habits, and that's the hard part. It's in enacting, and, like, we all have positive and negative habits.
Mhm.
My wife and I both have our habits that are where we start to rub each other wrong, and the
Yeah.
habits are a reflection on the values, you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's like
They
this
are.
it's this triangle that you have to have everything in place.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. The habits, that's interesting because, I think of the goals being, those dream conversations and getting aligned there. And the values, you gotta dig into too because we have different values, and we need to understand why we like to spend where we spend. And there's motivations behind that too, you know? Are you trying to create safety for yourself? Are you trying to create, adventure and spontaneity and vitality and all of those things, There's those deeper motivations, but yeah, the habits. So, what I have found is that, we tend like I mentioned, spender saver, we tend to fall into one of those, but when we're under stress, that's when our habits that we want kind of fall apart, and that's I just call it emotional spending, and so, yes, we can decide these are the habits I'm gonna have, but when we're under stress, don't you think? That's when we have trouble following through on the healthy habits that we want, and so we do need to kind of understand if this is kind of what you're speaking to, Sean, you can confirm or let me know, or we can go in a different direction, but what I was thinking was we have to understand what is it that gets us off course? What are the triggers? What's the environment? What are the messages or words that we hear from our partner or, from the outside world? What is it that's triggering us that trips us up in following through on our habits?
I love that, and I one of the things that I wonder people talk about couples and people accomplishing their goals, but, like, I wonder, like, what is it that makes it so couples don't accomplish their goals? You know what I mean? Is it because, when a crack begins to form in a financial plan, is one person being, like, undermined faster? And it's like, for me, one of the things that I had to start learning just as I paid off all my credit card debt, and I've been learning to use credit cards in a responsible way. Like,
Yeah.
I pay something, and then I pay it immediately down.
Uh-huh.
So I get points, I get those protections, but, like,
Mhm.
I don't treat it like a credit card.
Yeah.
I'm immediately paying them off because I know myself.
Okay.
I know myself, and so but one of the things is, like one of the realities is that I had to completely change my mindset, and I had to unlearn certain habits, and the habit that I had to unlearn was, first and foremost, was that I was my own weak link, and, like, as I
Uh-huh.
was paying down my debt, like, I could see that my impulse control wasn't great, So, I have a little box on my I have a little box on my
This is
desk
so good,
that is
so important.
a locked safe. Now, in here, I keep all my cards.
Wow.
I do not keep them in my wallet
Wow.
so that
Yeah.
I have to physically come home. And that's not, and my wife's like, why do you keep that safe on your desk? Other people will know where it's at. I'm like, no, that's not for other people. It's not to keep other people out.
Yeah.
That's to keep me out.
Yeah.
That's to keep me from going at those. And I have this tiny little safe that keeps me from going because the effort of sitting there opening it up and like, so if, like my point being like, I think that couples have to start identifying their own weaknesses
Yes.
and bringing that and leaning on the other person to be the person who can bring strength in that area. But you
Yeah.
need a vulnerability in your relationship to be able to see what it is that you need to unlearn and fix.
Yeah, absolutely, and you need, emotional safety in your relationship so that you can lean on the other and be honest about that and transparent. If you didn't feel like you had if you had that kind of safety in your relationship with your wife, you wouldn't have explained to her why you have that on your desk, you know? And so, a lot of times that safety isn't there in the relationship, so, there's a lot of work that is done just in developing that that really has nothing to do with money too, because you've got to have that kind of environment. Um, I would also add that what you're talking about is something that I call financial boundaries. Just like people know about boundaries work, right? There's books out there about boundaries or emotional boundaries and stuff like that. But I have not heard it often. I haven't by anybody else, honestly, talked about as financial boundaries, and so I um, I I have people work on their financial boundaries with themselves. You have a financial boundary right
Mm.
there that you set up. It's so wise. It's so practical, and it works. And then there's financial boundaries that we have to set up with our partner, as in, like, I don't want you to criticize me for this without us, approaching it in a curious, non-judgmental way. That might be a boundary between us, and then there's boundaries with the world. Like, I don't get on like, your boundary might be I don't get on Amazon, at 10 p.m. At night when my decision-making abilities are trashed for the day, and I'm vulnerable and I'm tired, that would be, perhaps a boundary with the outside world. Or if you have a family that always puts pressure on you to spend, in a certain situation and that is gonna undermine your goal, that's a boundary too. So, yeah, I think that's kind of what you're talking about. You were talking about the ones that we need with ourselves in order to be able to follow through and, um, accomplish our goals, to have the habits to accomplish our goals. But sometimes we also have to have those boundaries with one another, and we have to have those boundaries with the outside world too. Yeah, and
Right.
understand
Right.
those, like, do that inside work to understand what's inside my spending.
And one of the things too that I find with couples and money is the idea of balance
Uh-huh.
and
Yeah.
power dynamic balances. And I think that um if you haven't figured out the power games in your relationship, then money amplifies the imbalances in an extreme way. So I think that people have to like one of the things that I think that people need to understand, money is inherently just an amplifier. It's an
Yeah,
amplifier.
that's a good
It
word for it.
cranks up it cranks up the vibration of whatever you're in. If your relationship has imbalance, then that money is going to highlight that imbalance. It's going to resonate stronger. If you have an imbalance of one person is slightly dominant over the other, and that money is going to enhance that dominance. And it's like one of the things that I think that people have to understand is like, great, get the money, but also do the work. Figure out how can you communicate better because, money's not making you communicate poorly, but if there's a power imbalance and the person's not feeling confident or safe to speak back. I mean, when I was making less money, my relationship with my wife was much worse than it is when I started making more money. And it had nothing to do with anything except I didn't feel comfortable speaking up and standing up and saying what I thought was right in those situations because she was making a lot more than me.
Mm.
And I think that's one of the things that I think that the fairness, and a financial fairness, especially when you're looking at the balance between the two, and like there is a game that, how do you split and, you know, if you guys are sharing finances and there's an expense that is, $1,000 expense, and this is the thing that people have to think about. Are we splitting it 50-50? Does
Mhm.
one person cover it or does the
Mhm.
other? And I think people just get nervous about having some of these conversations because it's not always clear as to how to break those things down, and I think that people feel scared about going down that path in the first place.
Yeah. And I don't think there's a one size fits all. I personally
Mm,
would not want to be in a relationship where we split things 60-40 or 50-50 or,
mhm,
according to income. I
right,
personally would not wanna be in that. Wow, I mean, that's complicated. And, just pragmatically, that's not a lot of
mhm,
fun. And I always wanna keep, financial management as simple as possible. Um, but I
yeah,
think it also makes it's transactional, which is not
mhm,
what a partnership is about. Now, can that work? Yes, and there are some reasons why, um, people might need to still do that. They may have had a lot of financial abuse in the past. This may be a second marriage, and there may have been some real trauma around money. So you don't just dive in and go, "Well, yeah, you know, you're married now or you're living together, you're partners and you should just be sharing everything." That's just insensitive. Is that is that the best? Yeah, I think that's the best, and then it doesn't matter what your income is. So it just it can work, but you're right, Sean, if it's not going to be completely shared, then there has to be even more conversations about it, and you have to learn how to have those conversations. I think in any partnership, whether income is uneven or not, I think the responsibilities you navigate that, and the responsibilities aren't uneven in a partnership.
mm,
Unless the partnership is really in peril. If it's not a partnership, But there are so many different responsibilities in life. It's not just about making money. It's not just providing bringing home the bacon, couples work that out organically, I think, or maybe more intentionally, but they're sharing responsibilities because
mhm,
it's not just about how much money you put in the bank for you to, live off of together and to grow. So I think the
right.
responsibilities generally are always equal and shared. We just have to realize that it's not always equal as far as money, and that's okay. And put it together, pull it together and share it. That's what I think is the best.
I love it too. I love that as well. But to do that, you have to again get back to the values, get back to the shared
When there's
goal.
differences in values, it can be tough, like, "I don't want you spending money on that." "Well, then I'll spend my own money." That's where that comes in.
One person ends up being the fun killer,
Yeah,
and then
yeah,
one person seems reckless.
yeah,
And it's something that you have to find balance to. And
you do.
that's one of the things that for me and my wife, we are trying to shift toward the bucket method, because then, there's always that money that one person can, we have our goals, we have our habits, we have our values, but there's also an amount set aside that the person can do the stupid things and we're still going in the right direction.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Like I
Ah,
I bought a
yes.
I bought a cape today. I'm wearing my cape
I noticed
because
that.
my wife said we're going to an event, and it was like part of the dress code was to wear a shoulder cape.
Uh-huh.
And then finally I was like, she's like, actually, I'm going to go to this event by myself because there was a good reason for it. Then I won't get into that on air. I don't like some of the people at that event, and I don't have the ability to hide my emotions very well. I'm not that guy. If I don't like you, you will know I don't like you.
We haven't gotten there yet, so okay. Thank God.
I don't know if I'll ever get there because I'm not good at that. I'm not good at like, I don't like you. And so I was not going to be able to wear my cape to the event.
Oh,
So I'm
oh,
wearing my cape now
oh.
because it is awesome. and everyone should have an excuse to wear a cape. I will also bust it out for Halloween when I go dressed up as something from Hogwarts. That being
Oh,
said,
nice.
this is one of the dumber things that I bought recently.
Uh-huh.
It wasn't expensive, but it
Mhm.
still was like, eh, I got it.
That's
And my
okay.
wife's like, are you
Yeah.
serious? But I planned for it and I budgeted for it. And then she can look at me, judge me for the horribly silly,
Uh-huh.
stupid thing I bought. But there's not the anger, there's not the stress because I didn't pull from something that was important because it was already budgeted for stuff. And I think
Yeah.
that's where you can find that when you have set aside those guardrails and that you have people staying
Yeah.
inside those guardrails. And when you're inside the guardrails, there's safety, you know?
Yes, yes, and yeah, you have a plan. You have a financial plan. You have come up with it together, and you're aligned on it, and there's wiggle room inside of that. I mean, yeah, you buying the cape doesn't, blow the plan. So, you go buy what you want, Sean, stupid as it is. Go buy some more stupid stuff, but you're right, that doesn't I it made me think though of, yeah, here I do this work, but I learned so much about what's going on with my own husband too, and the mistakes that I make, and it wasn't too long ago, we had planned, sort of budgeted for this implement that he needed to buy for his tractor, and as we live out in the country, so you gotta have a few extra things to take care of it, and, it was gonna be more than what we'd planned, and he came to me, probably not the best time, I was working here in the office, but, and he said, "It's gonna cost this much," and I just immediately respond like, "Oh my gosh, wow, that's a lot," and see how sensitive we can be to those judgments from others. I knew immediately that that just deflated him, and here's why, because he's trying to accomplish something very difficult. It was to put crushed asphalt in a driveway, and he's already feeling stressed out about "Can I do this by myself and not hire this out? Can I do a good job?" And then all of a sudden, I'm like, I'm just reacting to the cost of that. And, um, it was a conflict of values, I guess, you know? It meant more to him. He valued it more because it would allow him to do a good job and give him some security in being able to do it. For me, it was like, "Well, crap, that's outside the budget."
One of the things that is, it's interesting to me because we have these different alignments and we can't always fully understand where the other person's at.
Yeah.
And we might, and if you take the wind out of their sails, it's really tough. I
Yeah.
have so I started making some merch for some of my podcasts. I have Barrels and Roots hats. I have hats for my full battery media. And one of the reasons is that because I spend part of my time in Vietnam, which is a manufacturing awesomeness place, and there's a lot of things that are made here. And I've been talking to my brother about starting our own bag company, like messenger bags, backpacks, and mountain biking hats and things like that. And I already started getting them made. Very limited run, about 30 pieces of 30 hats, 30 of the different hats, 30 of the backpacks, and 30 of the little fanny packs. And I'm going to be pairing them with my brand. So as I build my podcast, the
Mm,
Sean Trey Show, especially,
mm.
some of the guests, I'm going to be like, hey, you're an outdoorsman. I'm going to send you some of the swag, some of the gear that we're developing. I would love for you to go out and test this. Tell me how you like it, what you would change, and give me feedback. And as I build my podcast and grow my stuff, I have a company that I'm growing with me. And so that, like Mr. Beast has Feastables, other people have their thing. I've got this outdoor company brand that I'm starting to build. Now, when I told my wife about it, she looked at me like I was crazy. And I was like, because she didn't fully understand where my mind was at, didn't understand the vision that I had and all of that. She just saw me taking an excessive risk. And she's like, well, you're not Mr. Beast. You shouldn't be doing that. And I said, I'm not doing 10,000 bags. I'm doing 30 bags. Like that is a very reasonable thing, and it's just something to try, and then, if nothing else, I create some cool gifts that I get to send to some of the people that I wanna try this out, and they have something cool to walk away from to remember me by. But it was interesting because I had to then define as well, this will not come from this fund. It will come from a business fund. It's part of my marketing expense for my company, because this is still outreach. This is still
Mhm.
a connection builder.
Yeah,
And one of the things that was interesting is when we were able to talk it out and get clarity, first of all, she still didn't understand it, but she was able to respect it. And I think that that's a good step sometimes as well. People, you will not always see eye to eye with your partner. Like, there is always going to be a degree of difference that we all have. However, you can start to see why they do things
right.
and try to understand that.
It's just that it's so hard sometimes for couples to have the kind of conversation that you even had with your wife, for her to get to a point where she could come not completely understand it, but support you. And it's very and that speaks a lot to your marriage. But it is very difficult for many couples to have those conversations because they have entrenched patterns. When they try to talk about things, they will shut down or it will escalate. And they just walk away deflated and frustrated because you might go in with the right intentions, but you haven't learned yet how to get past those kinds of ingrained reactions. And so, it all sounds great, and it's still hard. Those conversations that you had, are
Right?
still hard, but at least you're able to have them. And then we've got
Yeah.
couples out there who don't know how. And that's where I bring in some and it doesn't really even have anything to do with money. It just happens to be that's where our focus is how can you have money conversations? And I'll bring in some, if you've ever heard of Gottman, got John, and
Mhm.
Julie Gottman, their
John Gottman's awesome.
research
Yeah.
over the decades. And so that has been a language that has been very helpful in my coaching to talk about the 4 horsemen. And so
Yeah.
if people understand more about what is happening in their conversations when they're trying to have that and why that's
Yeah.
happening and have like a shared language, then they can start to improve them. They can start to shift those conversations like, "Oh, that was defensiveness," you know? "Oh,
Mhm.
I heard criticism." Stonewalling is when you avoid and just shut down, those kinds of things. So, a lot of times when you have a language to something, it gives you a little bit more confidence in dealing
Yeah.
with it. So, the conversations are important.
They are, and they're a key part of clearing out the baggage. And, I think that when you uncover a Band-Aid, like, one of the dangers and fears is that what's underneath is going to be worse. And it's kinda like Schrodinger's cat. That cat lives in the box, and, you don't know, what was it? Is the cat dead? Is the cat alive? Like, that's the whole thing with Schrodinger's, like, cat. Like, you until you look at the box, you're not aware of the state of what things are at. And so it's interesting to, like, couples will exist in this weird, space between positive connections and very toxic ones because they're just not talking.
Mhm.
And it's like, but sometimes I think that we're trying to talk about how to help couples have financial conversations, but sometimes I think they need to start off by just having conversations.
Oh,
My
exactly.
wife and I like to go out. We have a date night where we'll go to this one. I don't drink much. I have a podcast about wine and I love wine and I grew up in wine country, but I'll have a glass of wine every 3 months. Like, I don't I so I'll go out to with her to the bar, and I'll have some sparkling water, and she will have a cocktail, and we just sit there, and it's not about the drinking, it's just about the community and the time, and we just get to sit there, and it's a place that we feel safe, and we just talk.
Mm.
And it's really interesting because, when we do that, we'll just I'll turn to her and be like, "How have you been?" You know, and I think that, like, that's if we sat
Yeah.
there and I had to turn to her and be like, "Let's talk money right now." Oh, man, that would load it up, you know? Maybe we do need to talk it, and we might get there,
Yeah.
but we have to just talk to each other before we get to that heavy space, you know?
Yeah. 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 It's true. I mean, yeah, when I'm working with couples, oh gosh, I have a little guide that they can use that just has a gazillion different questions that they can ask one another,
Mhm,
conversation starters, you know? But it's true. I mean, they're all around money, but there are some very general ones that can just they don't even have to be about money, or they're just so barely
mhm,
about money. Um, and when you're having conversations about dreams, those are good conversations to have that you really not
mhm.
aren't talking about money so much. You're just talking about your dreams. Yeah, so you make a really good point, and, yeah, I'm even gonna think about it because it's like, we try to start really easy, but let's throw some conversations in there that don't even hint at money,
Mhm.
right? Because, yeah, that's sometimes where people are starting. Mhm.
I love it. If you could talk to a couple today about how they can turn their relationship with money around, what would you tell them to do?
I hope it doesn't sound too simple, but, we like simple, right? And it doesn't simple
Mhm.
doesn't necessarily mean easy. But it comes back to those conversations and making connection.
Yeah.
So I would tell them to be very intentional. It may feel awkward at first, and to your point, it doesn't have to be about money, but find a time, where's your safe spot, a safe place for you as a couple. Um, and you it might be spontaneous, but it might have to be planned to make it happen, and that's where the
Mm.
awkwardness comes. You think, "Well, I'm a couple, we should just be able to talk anywhere, anytime, about anything," right? But you're not.
Mhm.
So you gotta start with these baby steps and be very intentional about conversations, an intentional conversation every week, every
Mhm.
week. Um, and I have, like I said, so many, possible prompts that I provide for them, um, but it can certainly be anything that they want, but think ahead, honestly, about what are we gonna talk about? Think about a question,
Mhm.
and then I would tell that couple, "When you go into this conversation, this is different than what it has been, because you've either shut down or it's escalated," those kinds of things. This is about just listening to your partner, asking the question, listen, be curious, maybe ask, a few more questions, to tag on to that because you heard something and have them dig a little deeper and then just affirm, you know, "Wow, thanks for sharing that," or "That was really interesting," or "I can see that's important to you." That's it. No judgment. There is no judgment in that at all, right? And that I think can really reset if there's been these patterns. It might not go perfectly. If it doesn't go perfectly, then promise that you'll come back and try again. Be there for your partner. And then, the other person it's their turn, asks the same question. Now it's my turn to ask you that question, and we're not wrapping it up in a pretty bow. We're not solving any problems, coming up with any plans. We are just talking and listening,
I love that.
feeling heard, feeling valued, doesn't so that you feel, yeah, and that emotional safety can grow like, wow, I can actually talk to them about what really matters to me, and there's not gonna be any judgment. So, yeah, it's gotta be reset, and you might have to just do it intentionally. It might feel awkward, and, "Oh, yeah, we're supposed to have our question now in our conversation." Uh,
Right.
yeah, that's what I would tell them.
Let me ask people, if people can go somewhere to find out more about you, where should they
Oh,
go?
thanks for asking. Yeah, I mean, really everything lives at my website, which is dzimmermanfinance.com. Just the letter D, dzimmermanfinance.com. And, there's an online quiz they can take, if they want, to find out a little bit more about the patterns that are happening with their conversations, and that's kinda fun. There's a single session that where we dive in and do a diagnostic and find out where you stand with your numbers. And then everything's there about deeper work stuff too. Yeah, and my perspectives and kind of the research that I bring in with how I use Gottman also and other types of things and sort of combine that with the practical stuff. Yeah. Yeah.